as Jesus walks around the temple in the gospel lesson this morning, we're told that he's there on the festival of the dedication. That's a fancy way of saying Jesus is walking around the temple during Hanukkah. Now, for those of you not well versed in the Jewish tradition, Hanukkah is a celebration of the rededication of the temple. You see, the temple had been compromised by a gentleman. I shouldn't really call him a gentleman. He was a real beast of a fellow named Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And Antiochus was an extension of one of Alexander the Great's generals who, after Alexander's death, took over that region of the world. We're moving through a fairly complex bit of history with broad brushstrokes to keep everyone awake here. But Antiochus was a kind of tenant king. He didn't really care much for Judaism. He didn't care much about the temple. He didn't care much about the people that inhabited the region. He was there to extract tribute and to exploit the region for his own good and the good of those he served. So one day, Antiochus has a brilliant idea. He decides to go into the temple in Jerusalem and erect a statue. Now think about the Jewish prohibitions against graven images. Pretty significant. It's one of the big commandments, you'll remember. So he puts this statue of Zeus there on the altar. And if this isn't bad enough, the face of Zeus kind of looks a lot like Antiochus himself. And if that's not offensive enough, he brings pigs into the temple. Unclean animals in the eyes of Judaism. And butchers them there on the altar. Now, a group, the Maccabees, a family, had about all they could take. And this was a time when the Seleucid Empire was in a state of decline, and they were able to create an uprising and toss their oppressors out and enjoy a certain period of peace and return to the observance of their religion as they had prior to being dominated. So when Jesus walks around the temple on the festival of the dedication, there's a lot of material and a lot of history in play. Antiochus had profaned the temple. It had been made clean. The situation in Jesus' time recalled that the Maccabees recalled the Maccabeans in particular ways. In the time of the Maccabeans, some elements of the temple, the Jewish aristocracy, and the high priesthood, they had compromised with Antiochus. They had entered into that kind of settlement with their oppressors that generated a more favorable position for them, for these members of the aristocracy and the priesthood. So that comes to mind when Jesus walks the temple on the festival of the dedication, talking about shepherding and about sheep. But most especially in Jesus' time, it brought to mind the compromise made by the aristocracy of Jesus' own day and by the priesthood of Jesus' own day with a new oppressor, the Romans. So when Jesus walks the temple, talking about what it means to be a shepherd and what it means to be in relationship with sheep as a shepherd, he's drawing a stark contrast to the shepherds that Israel knew. He's drawing this contrast between a compromised aristocracy, a corrupt priesthood, and how they function as overseers, only interested in shoring up their own position to the detriment of the health and life of the flock. So when Jesus talks about a shepherd that gets involved, that knows his flock, he's inferring that the current religious authorities in Jerusalem are not those kinds of shepherds. So these officials who interrogate Jesus, they want to know if he's a threat, but they're not interested in if Jesus is a religious threat. They want to know if he's a rival. Jesus, will you attempt to upset the beneficial settlement that we have here with our oppressors? They've collaborated, they've sold out, and they're very comfortable with it all. They're not looking for the God-man to show up on the scene. When they hear Messiah, they think priest, king, leader of an army to change the current situation. Jesus' ministry is so different. Jesus' ministry wasn't about a building or a socio-religious culture. Jesus was forming a body. Jesus was binding people together in one. People that hear his voice, know that voice, and respond to what is being wrought in their midst. Jesus' focus is deeper and different, pointing beyond a sight of God's presence to the fact that God lives within him and lives in those that follow him. Friends, I don't want to do you a disservice because I think Jesus cared about position, and I think Jesus cares about position very, very, very much. Jesus likes the position of shepherd. Jesus likes the position of servant. Jesus likes the position of one who will pour out life in the name of the love of God, leading a flock to a deeper knowledge of him and a deeper knowledge of his way. Do we hear his voice? Do we know his voice? Are we prepared to engage the position that really matters? Servant. Paschal lamb. Are we ready to build a flock like an old shepherd?